Good afternoon. Today we're going to talk about qualitative research and data-driven decisions. So I'd like to talk about what is qualitative research, a deep dive into a different form of data. Then I would like to talk about why we should use qualitative research and how we can implement it if we decide that's the direction we want to go in. So, what is qualitative research? We speak often in higher education about data driven decisions and how important those are. But so often, when we think about data driven decisions, what we're really thinking about is quantitative data. We might be thinking about what percentage of our current high school students are planning to go to college after graduation. We might look at those that are planning to go to college, whether they're planning to go to a community college or a four-year school. Or we might look at what percentage of our current high school students are planning to go into a workforce training program, or who is planning to go straight into the workforce with no extra training at all. And all of that data is really important when we are making our decisions, but it's not the whole picture. It doesn't answer the vital question of why. So, qualitative data and qualitative research really gets us to the human element of a decision. So, instead of numbers, we might look at perhaps a cultural piece. Maybe we might look at, for example, when our high school students are deciding whether they want to go to college or not, are their parents influencing that decision, their grandparents? What about their peers, their fellow classmates? Kind of how are they making these decisions? Qualitative research also gets at the notion that there is no one size fits all solution, no one right answer. Different groups of students may have different answers to that question, even in one particular group of students. So, for example, if we looked at the group of high school seniors who are planning to go to a community college after graduation, they may have very different reasons for why. So, qualitative research really gets us to this notion of multiple voices and multiple viewpoints. Not all people make the same decisions for the same reasons. Okay. Now, as my students would say, what is the short version of this? The TLDR, too long, didn't read. The short version of this is that qualitative research gives voice to the human element of a problem, and it really gets us to the root of why and how people are making their decisions. So now that we know what qualitative research is, let's talk about why we might want to use it. As I mentioned earlier, if you're only looking at quantitative data, you're not seeing the whole picture, right? You're missing puzzle pieces. And really, when you start digging into qualitative data and qualitative research, you might find that it answers questions you didn't know you had. You might find that it raises new questions. So, again, as I mentioned, even within the same group of students who are making the same decision, they might be making it for very different reasons. And those very different reasons might raise new questions that you hadn't even thought of. Another really important piece of this is that it can help us understand local trends and local populations. So, when we look at quantitative data, we generally have national data, we might have statewide data, we have all kinds of data on what our students are choosing to do after high school. But sometimes that data doesn't really get at local trends and local issues and things that might be going on within our own communities. And so qualitative data can really help us start to understand why students in our area, why students in Cleveland, or why students in Menor might be making the decisions that they're making. Qualitative data can also help us create custom solutions because, again, if now we're looking at different populations of students and what is going into their decision-making process, then we can make solutions specifically for them that really address their concerns and address the whys of the decisions that they're making. Okay. So what can we use qualitative research for? What is it good for? Well, it's good for almost all of the things that quantitative research is good for. So we might be looking at enrollment trends, and we might be looking at, for example, again, using high school students, why are high school students choosing to go to college or not, and how are they making those decisions? Well, on the qualitative side of the house, we can really start to dig into, again, those trends and what is the driving force behind the trend. So if our local students are choosing to go to a four-year school instead of a community college, we can start to look at why they are making those choices. And maybe there are solutions that we can implement that might make our community college more attractive to those students and might help them make the decision to come here instead of going there. We can also look at things like majors and job trends. So we can look at quantitative data all day long about what the job trends are, who's hiring, but we can also look at the qualitative side of the house. For example, what specific skills are employers looking for, and what do they want us to equip our students with? And why might they choose to hire our students instead of somebody else's students? Those are the kind of questions that you can ask employers and get at in a qualitative study versus a quantitative study. Again, how a student is choosing their major, what is influencing that decision? Is it just salary? Is it just the trends in terms of who's hiring? Or are they making those decisions based on other factors? And again, the only real way to answer that question is to talk to the students and find out why they are making those decisions. Graduation rates. Again, we can look at the numbers all day long that tell us this particular population of students is graduating at this rate and this particular population at this rate. But it doesn't get us to the why. And if we can really understand why students are stopping out or why students are able to continue on and graduate, then again, maybe we can implement some of these custom solutions for different groups of students that can really help them graduate. And the only real way to get there is to actually talk to the students and find out what is going on in their lives, because numbers don't tell the whole picture. So now that we've decided that we want to use qualitative research, how do we go about actually implementing it? So step one would be to identify the particular problem that we want to look at. And it needs to be something that is narrow enough that we can actually answer. The second step is to determine the types of data necessary. So in qualitative research, it's really important to have a variety of data sources. So you don't want to just speak with one student, right, and get their opinion. We need a variety of data sources. We may also want to look at different settings for collecting that data. So for example, if we're looking at enrollment trends and we're looking at high school students, do we want to go to the high schools? Do we want to talk to the high school students who are on our campus, maybe for dual enrollment classes? Um, do we want to speak to the students individually? Do we want to put them in focus groups? Do we want to speak to their guidance counselors? Kind of how do we want to collect this data? Who do we want to speak to? And that will kind of help shape our study. Then what we want to do is draft the questions. And again, this sounds very simple and straightforward, right? What do we want to ask these students? What do we want to know? But in reality, it's not that simple, because you might find that what you thought was a really well-worded question, what you thought is going to get you a particular answer, may not get you the answers that you're looking for. So you may have to revise and redraft those questions. You might have to ask different questions depending on the group of people that you're speaking with. So again, you draft the questions, you might test them out, you might revise them, you might rewrite them, you might change them. You also want to ensure that the questions are open-ended. So at the heart of qualitative research is this multiple voices, multiple viewpoints. You want to ensure that you're not asking leading questions and that you are not driving the process, right? It is the study participants who are driving the process and helping us understand what's going on. So we want to make sure that we kind of minimize our presence in the study and maximize the participants. Next, we want to analyze the data. And here as well, we want to minimize ourselves and maximize our participants. So we want to ensure that as we're looking at the data and that we're doing this in both a deductive and inductive process, that we are not allowing our biases or our opinions to overshadow the voices of the folks that we're studying. So we want to analyze the data, but we want to do this in a very careful and deliberate way. We want to make sure that we have multiple eyes on the data so that it's not just one person who's looking for themes and coding the data and figuring out what's going on, right? Having multiple multiple perspectives that are analyzing the data will help minimize the bias. If at all possible, perhaps we want to ensure that the participants have a chance to look over the data and tell us, is this really what you said? Is this really what you were trying to convey? So again, we want to analyze the data, and that sounds so simple on the surface, but it's really not. And then finally, we want to discuss the findings and implement possible solutions. So once we gather all of this data, what do we want to do with it? Well, again, we want to make data-driven decisions. So we want to take a look at the data that we've collected and the findings that we have and use that data to create solutions for our students and our problems. So in conclusion, we talked about what qualitative research is. So it's that human element of a research problem versus the number or the quantitative. We talked about why we want to use qualitative data and how it gets us at questions and how it gets us at information that we might not otherwise have gathered if we were only looking at quantitative data. And then finally, we talked about how to implement qualitative data into our studies. So we talked about the actual process for devising a qualitative study and what we might do with that data once we have it. Thank you so much for listening and any questions.